Kia ora koutou, ka mi nui ki koutou, kia ora, welcome to councillors, staff and those joining us by audio-visual link this afternoon for this meeting of the Dunedin City Council for Monday the 20th of September 2021. I want to take this opportunity before we begin the meeting today to acknowledge the passing of Anne Turvey since our last meeting, former St Kilda Borough and subsequently Dunedin City Councillor, and for much of the time since then a strong and staunch advocate for community facilities in that part of the city, in particular the South Dunedin Library project. And it's a shame that she will never get the opportunity to darken its door. And our thoughts are with her, whānau and friends, and what is a particularly challenging time for grieving in the COVID constraint environment. We have no one appearing before us in the public forum. We have an apology from Councillor Hall. Seconded, I'll move the apology be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Gary, thank you. All those in favour? Raise your hands. Those against? That's agreed. I'll move that we confirm the agenda as per the order paper. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Declarations of interest. Any amendments to be made to the interests register? Councillor Raddick. If people can use their raise hand buttons, it's the more efficient method, but I saw you that time.
Yes, yeah. Just that there is a change on my interest register, the inclusion of a new one, Arron Way Drive Investments. It's highlighted in bold.
Oh, so it's already on there?
It's already on there, yes, it has been included. It's the first time it's been included though.
Yeah, that's why it's highlighted in bold. Is there anything that isn't in the circulated interest register that needs updating?
Your Worship, Mrs. Austin's elected official ELT interest will be updated for the next council meeting. But not one.
Thank you. That's helpful. There appear to be no amendments required, so I'll move that the interest register for elected members and the proposed management plan is confirmed, and that the interest register for the executive leadership team is noted. Seconded, Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Those against? That is agreed, which takes us to the single substantive item on the agenda, item 5, Three Waters reform, and it's my intention in due course to move the recommendations and the draft letter as circulated on the agenda. Obviously there'll be a number of questions, and that is fine, and we will deal with any amendments that people wanted to propose to that sequentially and formally. Mr. Drew and Mr. Dyer and Ms. Graham are present. Anything that any of you want to offer to begin?
Yes, Your Worship, I just wanted to highlight an error in the cover report. So on page 25, paragraph 30, the items B and C have been transposed. So the figure B on the...
it's enough, you've recirculated.
And yeah, I've recirculated that via email.
Thank you. And apologies. I'm proposing not quite what is circulated on the agenda. There'll be an addition of some commentary around the integration of civil defence and emergency management functions, which will be circulated. But in the first instance, I will take questions if people can flag their interest in asking them in the way to which we have become accustomed. Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question about process before we get into the questions. And and the formal part of whatever amendments people are coming up with. Obviously, there's going to be amendments that will be agreed or not agreed. Can I take it that recommendation D, the authority for the Chief Executive to make minor editorial changes, is enough to ensure that whatever we end up with is a cohesive document, given the number of amendments that are being proposed?
It's enough, councillor, to ensure that it's cohesive. The trick will be providing the sufficient clarity so that they aren't more than minor.
Okay, thank you. And a further one in relation to the volume of amendments that have been proposed. Wouldn't it have been helpful if Councillor O'Malley, as the Chair of Infrastructure Services, given that he's got such an intense interest in this, had an opportunity before it landed on the agenda to incorporate some of the ideas that he's bringing to us now?
Councillor, I'm not going to answer that question.
About whether it was a good idea, whether it would be a good idea or not. But was the opportunity provided for feedback in advance of this being drafted for the public agenda?
Yes.
Councillor, oh sorry, is that you done, Councillor Benson Putt?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes. So my question, I suppose, is why I feel that we've stepped a few steps ahead on this letter, and that we're talking about as if it's happening without actually discussing it first. I think, and it's perhaps been raised by what has just been brought up as well. I certainly think that the Chair of Infrastructure has come up with some really good suggestions that I hoped were going to be included in our in this paper, but they haven't been. So my question is, why is this? Because it states in here, as I mentioned prior to this, that we support this in principle. Well, where's the wording in here? But just one second. But I'm just wondering if we do. That's the question. I mean, how does this acts as if we support it? Says the draft letter also affirms the DCC's broad support for reform, but I'm questioning who supports it.
Of regulatory reform or of service delivery reform, Councillor?
Both.
Well, they're very different things, but staff can comment on the broad support that is indicated in the draft for the regulatory reform.
My concern is that the letter is stating
Councillor.
Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Dyer will have a crack at this one, Your Worship.
So broadly, we've proposed this this feedback for the Minister based on a request for feedback from central government, and that request for feedback asked for us to consider a number of items plus more. We've worked through a number of forums to develop feedback we thought was in line with the councillor's broad view. The support for the reform program is for the program, not necessarily for any aspects of service delivery reform or anything like that. It talks to the broader reform program that has been proposed in terms of Three Waters regulatory reform and other tranches. But there is specific feedback throughout this submission that covers detailed aspects of service delivery reform.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Is it overly reductive of me to suggest that the difference between them is what the goal is in terms of what they're trying to achieve versus how that might be done and delivered?
Yes. No, it wouldn't be overly reductive.
Thanks. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Look, my question's in the actual letter itself, starting page 33. In the very first question, it says, or number 2, sorry, we accept there is a case for changing the way three water services are delivered. Now, I'm just not sure that I've reached that point yet, and I perhaps don't support that comment. In the second, number 4, we too are motivated to ensure New Zealanders get safe, reliable, and affordable water. And I guess our concern at this stage should be, I'd wonder if we could change that to our residents, because it's not our responsibility to worry about all the North Island water supplies and all the other. I'm just wondering if that's actually misleading. So while we share a goal that we want our residents to get good quality water, it's not a view that I necessarily feel is my responsibility for the whole country.
You can find a question in there.
I would suggest if councillors have amendments they want to make to the letter, the Mayor has outlined a process for how that would happen, and so that would be reasonably early on in that process, I'd have thought of.
But for clarity, the staff comment as provided in this draft is talking to the system at a national level rather than at a local level.
Yeah,
Correct.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Bishop. I have 2 questions to start off with. My first question is around the letter that was sent to the Minister on the 25th of August from all of the local mayors raising a number of issues. I'm deeply concerned about the lack of information, the television advertisements, council's limited resources, etc., and asking for a pause. Has there been any reply to that letter or any indication that there might be a pause?
Not that I'm aware of.
So we're nearly a month out from sending the letter and there's been no reply.
I didn't say that, I said not that I'm aware of. Staff?
Not
Okay.
that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, oh gosh, now which page is this? Page 34, around the 20 weeks engagement that is in the letter. I just wondered if we were to have to undergo 20 weeks of consultation, is this in our budget? And what would be the approximate cost?
We don't know what the cost would be, but we would find the money to do it within the Three Waters budget because it's such a significant decision.
So would we be talking tens of thousands of dollars to do something like that?
Would depend on the nature of the consultation we undertook, so I wouldn't want to hazard a guess on the cost at this point, Councillor.
I was wondering whether it would be possible to ask government in good faith to give some funding to allow us to undertake consultation, which we wouldn't have budgeted for. So I wonder whether we might be able to pop that in the letter somehow. I'll think about perhaps some more wording. Thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. I'm just curious about the civil defence emergency clauses. So you said that you would include them in the draft letter. Is that my clauses that I sent as written, or would they be subsequently edited?
No, I've asked staff to draft something that they will circulate, and then I guess it's up to the meeting to decide whether that's, or you in particular, to decide whether that's an adequate provision.
So we've just finalised that, Councillor Raddick, and we're about to circulate them to councillors. It captures what you had proposed, but it's just written in the same style as the document.
Thank you.
That's you for now, Councillor. All good. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm wondering about an email I sent on the 24th of August, which outlined 5 points in terms of alternative structures for Three Waters. And admittedly, it was not in direct response to the meeting we had the other day, but it was in fact directly related to this letter. I'm wondering why none of those 5 points have made it into this letter at all. Anybody can answer that.
Sorry, we will have to check back and find that email, councillor, so if you could circle back to us, your worship.
Sure, it's sent to you, also CEO and Mr. Drew as well. My next question I have is the purpose of today's meeting. I'm trying to find the larger purpose. Have we made a council position in terms of accepting the 4 entities in existence, and are we not going to propose any opposition to them whatsoever? Because as the letter is written, it is it responds to the fact that they are going to form. So can I ask, when did we make a decision as a council?
Councillor, we haven't made a decision, and nor are we being asked to make one at this meeting. And that would be one way of framing what we've been asked to do in terms of giving feedback on this proposal. Another way of looking at that would be to, regardless of our intentions or best efforts, were this to be a model that was imposed upon us, would we want to give feedback on how to shape that model?
So in this letter, we are not in any way at all laying down a concern that we may not want the 4 entities. Why are we not doing that?
I think that may depend on your reading of the letter, but I think the comments that are made in it around the lack of alternative models being explored covers that. But we also have...
I guess I would differ on whether it covers that, I guess, your worship. So I guess the question is, the 29 changes that I'm proposing to the letter are going to be rejected by you, your worship, because you are not going to include them in the amendments. Is that correct?
No, I don't see how you come to that conclusion, councillor.
Well, you're including Councillor Radich's amendments, but not the ones I sent.
Oh, well, they could be dealt with by amendment. It seemed like a sensible suggestion of something that was missing, and it was one less thing for us to deal with by way of amendment. In the time that I've had to consider your list of amendments, councillor, I haven't been able to assess them in the same way.
And I guess one last question before I'll give the mic back to somebody else. As chair of the Infrastructure Committee, I think Councillor Benson Pope raises a good point. Why? Well, not why. I was not given this letter any earlier than any other member of the council. And I think my position has been, I have had a lot of interest in this from a long time. Is there any particular reason that as chair of the Infrastructure Committee, I got this at the same time as the rest of the council? Given that what I'm amending is not much way of adding new points, but in fact, changing the wording of the letter.
It wasn't my understanding of the staff response earlier.
It's not my understanding either, councillor. My understanding was you were provided with a hard copy version a day before the agenda went out.
I was provided with a hard copy version of a day before it went out. So if I had responded to it at that time, given it was a hard copy, so that's very hard to edit that, how would have that been any different from sending them in yesterday?
It would have given staff the opportunity to consider your suggestions and whether or not they were comfortable incorporating them. But for the avoidance of confusion, you just said you didn't receive this any earlier than anyone else, but now you accept that you did.
Yes, I got it a whole 24 hours in a hard copy form from a staff member, yes.
And did you provide input at that point as was offered?
I wasn't there to meet him on that particular issue, and therefore I didn't read it until after we'd all received it. I didn't know I had an urgency to read it. And again, your worship, is that really what we're calling about good communication here? So what is the purpose of today's meeting if it is simply to ratify a letter, which the rest of the council certainly have only seen for a few days, and it's got a number of points in it. It is a very long letter. So did we come with a quota? Thou must not go past this number, or otherwise it can't be looked at. You have taken too much of our time.
Councillor, the purpose of the meeting is quite clear. per the covering report and the draft submission, we've been asked to give feedback. It's optional. We don't have to provide feedback on the government's proposal, but I would suggest that our community would be better served if we did. And the purpose of this meeting is to adopt or not what has been drafted by staff. By way of any,
You're clarifying then that staff wrote the letter and that you're signing it.
Which is usually how these things work.
I put an email in. This is a process question. I put an email in about an hour ago asking how do we deal with this. So I will then have to move each of these as a single amendment. Is that the case?
Correct.
Very good. Ms. Sullivan, can you assist me on how to do that, please? I'll be watching my email. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervis.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Oh, sure can.
Given that we have a commitment to plain English and have taken some pride in, I believe, getting a prize for plain English, why is it that we have Maori words in this proposed letter that are not translated? And a number of them are difficult to even find in the Maori dictionary. For instance, Matai Arawai. If you look at the Maori dictionary, there are no matches. Why is it that we are using Maori words now, which can have any number of meanings without translation?
Anyone?
Well, it's your letter, Your Worship. Why have you used Maori words without translation?
The letter's been drafted by staff, as the councillor is well aware.
We're just trying to come up with an appropriate answer, Your Worships.
That's fine. We can park that and come back to it.
All right, I have other questions.
Go on.
Our Three Waters infrastructure is based on piped water systems. We have drinking water, we have sewage, and we have stormwater. What traditional knowledge of pipe systems can Maori bring to bear on our Three Waters infrastructure? Why is it that we are assuming that Maori will be able to input into our Three Waters infrastructure system when Maori didn't have any such traditional knowledge? They never had any pipes.
Oh God. We'll add that to the list, shall we? Run through them all.
All right then. Why is it that the area D, which is proposed to be the area that is going to be a single centralized control area for our Three Waters, why is it that this area D basically is the same area that Ngāi Tahu conquered and had conquest over at the time of the Treaty of Waitangi? Why is it that that area has been chosen to be the area that Ngāi Tahu had managed to suppress all the other tribes at the time of the Treaty of Waitangi? Why is it that that area is proposed to be our area for water?
Oh, that's not a question our staff can answer. The proposal was put forward by the Department of Internal Affairs, and the Takiwā boundary, as far as I'm aware, is written in legislation through the Ngāi Tahu Treaty Settlement in 97.
That's correct.
The paperwork says that the area D roughly accords with the Ngāi Tahu spread at the time of the Treaty of Waitangi. I want to know what the relevance of that is to a current piped Three Waters infrastructure system.
Again, the proposal was from government, councillor.
So you don't have any idea of why government has decided to use the Ngāi Tahu Conquest area as its template for South Island's water legislation.
No more than you do.
Right. What is the historic Ngāi Tahu dominance over other tribes to do with Three Waters infrastructure anyway? Why is it that we are wanting to share governance and control of our infrastructure systems with iwi? What's the reason for that? We have some Maori elected representatives. We have some unelected representatives on council. What is the rationale behind giving control of our water supply, not just to a centralised agency, but to a centralised agency that is 50% run with iwi? What's the rationale for it?
That's also not the proposed structure, Councillor. The regional representative group, who per the government's proposal is tasked with appointing an independent selection panel, who then in turn appoint the board to govern the entity, and the only other key function of the regional representative group is to provide feedback on statements of intent, etc. That's not what I would call control in any meaningful sense.
If you wish to dispute the meaning of control, let's just say any other word you like: association, involvement, whatever. What is the rationale? What traditional Maori knowledge is able to be brought to the running of piped Three Waters infrastructure? Because it's fully embedded in your feedback letter to MP Mahuta.
Yeah, and council is of a view that we should be involving iwi Māori in decisions that are important to them, which is why we overwhelmingly voted to appoint Runaka representatives onto the relevant standing committees that look at this work. I've got no interest in relitigating that debate again today.
Mike, I'm not wanting to relitigate it. I'm trying to ask you, why is it that in the context of the Three Waters, we have this iwi Maori involvement assumed? What's the reason?
Because that is the framework that we're being asked to give feedback on. In terms of the government's interest in co-governance and being an effective partner in upholding the Treaty of Waitangi.
Right. So what you're saying then is, because of the government's interest in co-governance, that is to say Maori and government operating cooperatively together, because of that, we are also in Dunedin wanting to agree with the co-governance model as per your letter.
As per the decision of council to appoint representatives to our standing committees. It's consistent with...
No, I'm talking about your letter, and I'm talking about Three Waters. I'm not talking about the appointment of people to our infrastructure committee.
This is the opportunity for you to ask questions of staff. If you want to ask questions of your fellow elected members, that is best handled through debate.
I'm asking the question of you, Your Worship.
Do you have questions of staff, Councillor?
As the signatory of this letter.
On our behalf, yes. Do you have any questions of staff?
The plain English one is one I think I deserve an answer to. I'm surprised that it's so difficult.
And we will come back to that. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Your Worship. Gosh, the joys of remote Zoom meetings. I'm already getting the impression that this letter may expand in a worryingly uncontrolled way. My question is to Mr. Dyer and Mr. Drew, and is partly, I think, being answered by you in a response to a question. Can I just, I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Can you confirm that this letter is, I think is simply part of an optional opportunity to feedback. There's nothing compelling us to do so.
That's correct, councillor.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. So my question, or first of all, thank you to staff for the draft letter. And I just note that from our responses, my own in particular around workforce, I felt that was well reflected in the letter. But in terms of questions, we talked about the possibility of having a briefing around Ngāi Tahu's position in relation to the Three Waters reform. When is that likely to happen, or do we have a sense of Ngāi Tahu's position currently? So that's my first question.
Yeah, thanks. I can answer that insofar as the tribe don't have a position for or against the proposal as it currently stands. They are working on, as we are, feedback on the model as proposed in the event that this is the model that we end up with in terms of shaping that, and they're doing that in discussion with local government representatives around the South Island.
Okay, thank you. And I had a question for Mr. Drew or Mr. Dyer, either or. In terms of somewhere in the report, it talks about 82% of our households are on reticulated water, which is what this proposal relates to. The other 12%, am I assuming that some of those will be on rural schemes, but are the majority domestic self-supply of that 12%? Could you just clarify that for me?
Yes, councillor. There will be in the order of 100 of those properties that will be on rural water schemes, typically in the Hindon and Rocklands areas. The rest, or the majority of the rest, will be self-supplies.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the questions for the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
My question is actually the locus of decision making, and New Zealand is 268,830 square kilometres, Southland 31,000, Otago 31,000, Otago Southland 62,447. So the landmass of Scotland is 77,910. The landmass of Tasmania 68,401. So under both the Scotland and Tasmanian models, the landmass is similar to Otago and Southland. And I think my concern is in both those models, the locus of decision making is actually far closer to the communities than in the model that's presently presented. The South Island is 32% larger than the North Island. So what's your comment around locus of decision making and landmass, plus in both the Tasmanian and Scotland model, they've got large, very large urban centres. And my concern is that the models are based on a landmass similar to Otago Southland, and the locus of decision making is actually much closer to what our present model is actually presenting.
So DIA specifically acknowledge that, and that's why they are seeking feedback on how you ensure local decision making.
Yeah, well, you know, my concern is
your concern a question, councillor?
Well, my question is in the current model, it's pretty much the whole of the South Island, which is in total 32% bigger than North Island. And so my concern is, and my question is, I believe that the locus of decision making based on the Tasmanian and the Scotland model is far closer to those communities in those areas. And so my question is, can we look at the Scotland and Tasmanian models and infer that, in fact, those land masses need to be smaller?
Councillor, a couple of things in response. The first is population is a better marker in the situation in geographic area, and that's why the DIA have structured in this way. And it's important, I think, to realise that there are 4 proposed entities and not just one. And Scotland just has one, and I think Tasmania only has one. And so that's an attempt to recognise the geography, but also focus on where the population is and therefore where the service delivery needs to be. It's tricky. I get the locus of having that decision making at a local level is important, but this is the attempt, splitting it up into 4 entities and not a single entity.
Another question I have is around the regulator, and we put a 10-year plan out and it goes to audit, and it's audited to see if we comply. And I note that Nelson in their statement around or one of their outputs around this changing of models is that, in fact, the Three Waters planning should still be within the 10-year plan cycle. And is there the opportunity to look at 10-year planning as a way of local government having input that goes to a regulator that is audited to see if we're meeting the environmental standards, the health and safety standards, and the urban growth standards? I see it similar to what our 10-year plans are, and because my concern is that, in fact, under the current model, there's a silo. You know, these Three Waters are actually separate from council, and in the 10-year planning cycle, those things have to be accounted for together anyway. I think there is, my question is, could a regulator communicate with 10-year plans so that, in fact, that cycle is audited regarding those standards from the regulator?
Who wants to have a crack at that?
I've been...
It's just a different model, but I think it would work.
So one of the challenges at the minute and why this is feedback only is that there is still a lack of detail. And so your question does speak to a level of detail that's very difficult to answer. One of the things around the structure of the entities is ensuring balance sheet separation. And so linking the entities with 10-year plans may not achieve that. And so that would be something that would have to be worked through in any detail. But if that's something that council feels it wants to include in the feedback, we would need an amendment to that effect.
Well, I just looked at what Nelson said and I go, well, it's an integral part of our planning when it comes to environment, when it comes to urban growth and renewal. All of those fit within that cycle and are intricately connected. And so that would give local government that input. But the regulator can look at our plans and go, hey, you haven't put enough in for urban growth, for example, or hey, you haven't put enough in for making sure the stormwater is clean before it's pumped out to sea or whatever. So it would still fulfill the purpose. And I think looking at a financing model, could the financing model be different? Could it be a mixture of both local rates and government? I mean, the Tasmanian model looks at 10%.
Councillor, Councillor,
Yep.
do you have any questions of staff? The comment around whether or not there are alternative models is valid, and no one's disputing that, but this is an opportunity to ask questions of staff.
Well, my question is, do you think there could be other financing models that could fit with local government getting more money for the much needed higher grades of infrastructure, higher standards, growth, health and wellbeing?
There are other options, but at the moment we are providing feedback on the option that the government has chosen. And so that's what this document does. If councillors wish to make amendments or provide other suggestions, the forum is today by way of amendments.
So, I mean, one of the amendments I would suggest is that, in fact,
We can get to amendments in due course. Do you have questions
Okay.
of what is drafted on the agenda?
Okay. I'll stop there.
Councillor Raddick.
Here we go. I'm muted. Thank you. I have two questions. Firstly, how many staff were involved in the drafting of both the executive summary and the letter? Government.
5 probably in any substantial way.
Certainly. And how long did that take to, draft the 65-point executive summary and 45 points in the letter? Sorry, we're on mute. You're on mute.
So we're not on mute. We were just trying to do the maths.
Compare.
Yeah, so between
20 and 40.
Yeah, between 30 and 40 hours.
Right. Oh, well, I suppose with 5 staff that is helpful, but for us councillors, we get 2 days to consider our amendments and response and input into this letter. How do you think that is sufficient time for a single person to consider everything involved in here and all the reading that went beforehand to make an adequate response to suggesting amendments?
I do.
Yep, it was a question of staff.
Well, councillor, all I would say is that we had flagged that this was coming for a reasonable period of time. We had provided tranches of reading for councillors over the previous weeks. We hit over the previous 8 weeks. We provided guidance on which of the material was new on this agenda and which wasn't. And we did our best to make it, as straightforward as possible.
Yeah, my only point is that, I would like to have more time. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. The question that Councillor Elder raised a moment ago about council's role in giving effect to urban planning, I would have thought is quite strongly covered in the draft submission. Is that not the case?
That was our intention, because we realise that that's a significant issue for the council.
Thank you. We'll come to that then. My actual question, though, was in respect to the executive summary of page 19. In point 4, there's a comment made about legislative considerations. So this turns on what this meeting is about and what the submission is about. Would you like to elaborate, Ms. Graham, on the position, the legislative position, and our incapacity to make, because of the lack of information, to meet the moral and legal requirements of council decision making that you talk about there? Because it seems to me that that is the purpose of this meeting, irrespective of the nature of our feedback, we're not actually looking to get a hard council position. We might get there sometime in the future, hopefully not too far away, but that's not what we're on about today, I would have thought.
So the officer advises that at this point in the process, we have insufficient information to meet our obligations under the Local Government Act for council to have a formal position.
Thank you.
And further to that, legal advice has been received that were we to ignore that officer advice and take a position, it would be porous with respect to judicial review.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. I actually, just to follow up on that question that Ms. Graham's just answered, Minister Mahuta has mentioned in many media interviews that the councils have received a lot of quality information. You've just replied to Councillor Benson Pope that we have received insufficient information. Can you elaborate on that, please?
There's a difference between quality information and the information you need to meet your obligations under the Act.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone asked, and not just from our council, but from other councils, why the government has not extended the October 1st deadline for this letter, especially with COVID?
I don't have, none of the three of us have an answer to that, councillor.
Okay. And then when I listened to Minister Mahuta in her numerous interviews that she's had, she's talked about a compelling case for change. And essentially she talks about the inefficiency and unsustainable for the future and cost obligations. Yet, I guess from being a Dunedin City Councillor and looking at the work that we've done and on the 10-year plan, that I'm struggling to see where that is the case. And I understand this is a document that we're submitting around the Three Waters reform, but I don't think we actually strengthen the argument that actually we are working in that area strong enough.
Question?
What is the question?
Are we articulating that the strength of Dunedin city governance and the future of our 10-year plan is clearly articulated that we do not have it inefficient and unsustainable for the future, as Minister Mahuta likes to point out?
We're responding broadly to the DIA's reform proposal. And so that's what this submission attempts to do. And that proposal has a single South Island entity. So how we want to position the city within that is the point of this feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
I just actually want to comment or ask a question specifically for the CEO just said then. So we are specifically feeding back on the formation of the South Island entity, but in our submission, we are not feeding back with alternatives or even with the information set that we have right now, the concerns that we might have, because I agree that we do not have the full information set, but do we not have enough already to give a pretty good indication of where this would take us? And so are we only talking about the South Island entity as it relates to us, and we are not feeding back on any other proposals?
Councillor, that's not what I intended to say. And what I intended to, and I think it was what I said, that this is the council's opportunity to provide feedback on the council's position on where the DIA are at the minute. And so this is quite a high level still.
No, I agree. That is what you said, but it is not our intention to extend the remit of this feedback to any other models.
Well, that's, council has an opportunity, I guess, if that's what they want to do, but staff have provided a draft document for councillors to consider based on the what DIA are seeking feedback on.
Thank you. And so this is due on the 27th, is it not?
It's due on the 1st of October.
So we are receiving, if you just said, a draft document, but we will be required to finalize it in this meeting. Is that correct?
That's my objective.
Cool. Okay, now those were just questions that came up during the questions while I was waiting. I have a question around point 28. Some of the assumptions Wix made for the Dunedin Council are inaccurate. What is the magnitude of the inaccuracy? The Wix number is presumably the dashboard number, is it not, of 2051? Well, partly contributes to making up the dashboard number of 2051 if we do not go in. Is that correct?
We'll just get Mr. Drew lined up to answer this one.
So it's difficult to put a hard and fast number on it, but the Morrison Lowe analysis, financial modelling of Dunedin alone versus Dunedin in a Ngāi Tahu Takiwā was in the order of, there would be savings in a Ngāi Tahu Takiwā in the order of $300 or $400, not the 3,000 or 4,000 that the Wix modelling predicted. It could be anywhere in that range.
I thought it was nearer to 200, but the Wix one is definitely around $3,000 higher, is it not?
It is.
I'm wondering if I feel that sentence is not particularly strong, because those Wix analysis numbers are being used all around the country, and they are all coming out with that order of magnitude different from the council's internal calculations. Is that true too? That the Wix number, when you look at the dashboard, is very large compared to going into the entities, if you look at almost any dashboard of any council in the country?
For the majority of councils, that is true.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Councillor Lofiso.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. Tēnā koutou to the staff, and tēnā koutou to the colleagues. My question goes back to our face-to-face meeting. I guess it's a matter of process. Our face-to-face meeting with iwi representatives and council representatives, with a face-to-face meeting with the minister attending before she went to the policy school. And it's just coming from a Polynesian perspective, and I'm just making a suggestion or asking what the probability of this process is, actually presenting the letter, but also inviting the minister, because she said she was willing to come and talk to us again if we presented this letter, whatever it ends up being, with an invitation for her to come and talk to us in this place.
I think that's a fine suggestion, and I'm happy to add that to the resolutions, that we extend that invitation for the minister to come and discuss the contents of this with us in person.
Okay.
Councillor Vandevers.
Our paperwork tells us that the proposed new Three Waters nationally is going to be creating an additional 5,800 to 9,300 jobs over 30 years. And yet MP Mahuta claims at the same time that there will be significant Three Waters efficiency gains. How do you get Three Waters efficiency gains with a massive new bureaucracy of 5,000 to 9,000 people being additionally employed?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Those estimates have been deliberately developed in line with the capital expenditure profile. So the 9,300 includes what is an upper limit estimate of the number of jobs created through a broad construction program, workers on engineering sites, that sort of thing. So the majority of those jobs would be created for that kind of purpose as the city, or as the country moves through a large infrastructure investment program.
So where then given these massive number of increased jobs, where do the efficiency gains come from, given that we're employing many, many thousands more people?
The suggestions through the proposal have been that through working in these new entities, by managing the construction market differently and by managing all of the works required in a coordinated way, that more work will get done for less money, but the job volume required is still significant.
When you say it'll be done in a more coordinated way, and you know, for instance, that Christchurch water infrastructure supply is underground and ours is rainwater catchment, and there's nothing common about these systems, where does the management efficiency come from? Are they contemplating having a massive contract for a single contractor across the whole country, a bit like what was attempted with the hospital food supply contracting debacle from a few years back? Are they looking at having a single contractor for the whole country, and in that way, because of economies of scale, trying to get efficiencies?
We certainly don't have the detail of any proposals in terms of contracting or anything like that. One thing I would suggest is that the example you gave is one example, but there are many other examples of surface water takes and similar practices throughout the South Island or the rest of the country that could be considered common.
Okay. The Morrison Lowe report starts out in its summary by saying that due to increasing standards and requirements, a change to the way Three Waters are delivered is inevitable. This is the opening assumption of the Morrison Lowe report. Do you believe that in all scenarios looking forward, that we will be increasing standards and requirements, and that this is inevitable, as the Morrison Lowe report assumes?
As an officer working in the Three Waters space directly, we are already experiencing just that, increased levels of standard application and increased levels of information required by our regulators, etc., etc. So we are experiencing that.
Oh, I fully understand that we are having to provide a whole lot more paperwork, but in terms of actually, and that would be the requirement side of things, but in terms of actually increasing the standards of the quality of our water supply, we have had significant increases in the past. I believe most people here are quite happy with those. Do you believe it's inevitable that those standards are going to be significantly increased and forced upon us by central government, as assumed by the Morrison Lowe report?
We are already moving towards a position where we may need to bring decisions to council soon around investment in infrastructure. I think that is a likelihood.
That wasn't my question, but I'll accept what you said as being helpful. Thank you. That's me in the meantime. I may have some more questions later.
Kia ora for that. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. It's been mentioned that we might have ongoing costs even if we lost the assets and were paid the 46 million, what have we got any idea what sort of costs we might, face and what that will be for if, if the assets were taken off us?
No, our CFO and myself are working through that at the moment. We don't know yet.
Certainly a lot of the concern from the public that I've been getting, and I'm sure a lot of the other councillors have as well, is the loss of the assets. And there was a recent letter that went round, thank you to one of the councillors who put that around, that I thought was a very interesting read, from the former Mayor of Christchurch, Vicky Buck, who was talking about how much value those assets are in their city. And obviously we've got the same issue. Our assets are worth a lot of money, and we're being offered, 46 million in our case. How does that 46 million compare to the total cost of our assets?
At present, I believe our asset
Can anyone
base,
hear me?
Yeah. At present, I believe our asset base is valued at around $2.5 billion, but that is gross replacement cost, not depreciated replacement cost. So the comparison is 46 to 2.5 billion.
Okay, so 40, I mean, does that say? I don't know if anyone can answer that.
No, Councillor, we're struggling to hear you. You're being let down by your online infrastructure.
I know. I have to apologise. I don't know what's going on. All the sound at my end is scrambled and I keep dropping out. So sorry. If you can hear me anymore, I've got a couple more questions if that's possible. I attended, along with some of the other councillors here, a governance workshop about, there was a lot of, mostly all the representatives, including mayors that were there, had heaps of questions and did not like the model for the governance. Now, we were assured that we'd get some answers back on that. What I've seen is an email that said they're going to put those to the minister, but has anyone received answers to those questions we put around the governance structure? Because those are really important and will determine what sort of things we should be putting into a letter like this.
Councillor, for clarity, that was a workshop organised by Local Government New Zealand. Is that the one you mean?
Yes.
As opposed to by the Dunedin City Council. That's just the distinction I'm trying to make there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes.
I wasn't at that workshop, so anyone else who was, who's received anything? No.
No. I mean, my point is that right now, and for example, the questions that Councillor Vandervis asked before around, the model and how they'll do that with the contractors, I thought was a very good question. Once again, we don't have answers to those big issues. And I think this is the problem. We haven't got enough information at the moment to make any decisions. But I also wondered why in this letter, and this has been raised before, but why aren't we talking about different models where, for example, highlighting some of the benefits of an Otago Southland model where our mayor currently works with those other mayors, and we have a relationship there already with the regional and with the other city councillors in our area. So why aren't we benefits in that? It's mentioned in part, but not highlighted, and it doesn't even sound like it's our preferred option, like we don't really talk about it much at all.
We don't have a preferred option for reasons that you've just outlined, and staff have prepared this submission in response to the questions that they have been asked by the Department of Internal Affairs. Whether or not the wording of their responses is adequate, that's a question for the elected membership to answer.
Okay, but I suppose what I'm asking is, can we, and your answer will be, I suppose, with amendments, which I hope we can do, is highlight not saying this is our preferred option, but some other options that can be considered.
Anything is possible by way of amendment. Do you have further questions?
Thank you. Oh, one more question. Can I ask the CEO, or two more questions, sorry. This one's for the CEO. I know in the past, the CEO has said there's concerns around if, say, for example, we obviously haven't made a decision yet, but if we opted out, is this model set up in a way that it's very difficult for a council to opt out? And just so the public know, and so that, you know, so around that, what are the issues if we decided as an option to opt out? What are the concerns legally and as a council for us running normal, you know, our normal procedures for running?
So,
did anyone hear me?
They're processing the question, Councillor.
I was trying to get my mouse to move, to be honest. I couldn't get myself unmuted. We have a new regulator and a new approach to regulation. And so regardless of the shape of whatever entity it is, there's no status quo anymore. And so for councils, whether or not you are operating alone or operating as part of a different delivery provider, we are going to be required to meet standards in a way that we haven't been, you know, required in quite the same way in years past. So that puts a different onus on any organisation, and so that's challenging. And then, were we to go it alone, and again, this is a little bit of conjecture because we don't know that much, but the obligations that would fall to the chief executive of an organisation attempting to meet those regulations on their own, outside of an aggregated service delivery model, are potentially far harder to meet, and it puts an obligation on the chief executive as the PCBU that may not be easy to meet. But again, that will depend entirely on the shape of what it is that the service delivery models are. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. One more quick question, and I might be able to answer this, but I got the impression when we had the one meeting with iwi that iwi had a lot more information than us, and that they'd perhaps been in more discussions and had, you know, were sort of further down the track than we were. Is that possible? And is it possible that the government could have made more promises to iwi that we don't know about? And is there any way that we can get up to speed with that? And what if there's been promises made to iwi that when the councils make their decision, they conflict with what's been decided there? How does that work? Can anyone hear me? Oh.
Yeah, the audio isn't the obstacle. I can't speak to any conversations that have been had with iwi Māori around the country because for obvious reasons I'm not included in those. Certainly I think the engagement, DIA's engagement program, if anything, started late and was less adequate in terms of what they were doing in engaging with iwi Māori, as opposed to somehow having better access or stronger conversations. Can't speak to any negotiations that have been going on at a tribal level. What I would say though is that particularly in the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā, the Papatū Runanga have come to a collective position in advance of any consensus position that the various territorial authorities in that same geographical area have been able to manage.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Just have a question about our compliance with drinking water standards. Currently, sorry, so in some of the large reading that we were given, it said that Dunedin was 100% compliant with drinking water standards for the years 18-19, and I just wondered whether there was an update on whether we had maintained 100% for 1920. Has that been published on the government website?
It hasn't yet been published on the government website.
I was asking that question, whether we had remained at, and if it hasn't been published on the government website, have we remained at 100% compliance as we did the previous year with the drinking water standards?
We haven't maintained 100% compliance, and it speaks to my answer to an earlier question around what changes when your regulator changes approach. And so, Mr. Drew, I think we're at 97% compliance. All of our water is safe and fine, but the compliance standard around some very technical things are being enforced differently. And so Simon can speak to a couple of those.
Yeah, I've got the annual report on drinking water quality 2019-2020 in front of me from the Ministry of Health. Is that the same statistics that are used by the government? Because it has everything is met and that we've complied, but you're saying that there's 97% compliance rather than 100% is...
in the subsequent financial year to the report you are looking at, Councillor Parker.
Oh, so I'm looking at 1920.
Yeah.
You were talking about 2021.
Technically accurate. We know that in the one that is about to be published, that it's at 97%, but that's a change in focus from the regulator and not a change in the quality of the water.
I see you mentioned standards changing. Have we been in Tamata Arawai's getting set up at the moment? So have we been given any indication of what those water standards will change to?
And to be fair, it's not the standards changing, is my understanding. It's how they're choosing to enforce and regulate them.
Okay. So my other question was, you said the word that as CEO use the PCBU, and I don't understand what that means. What is the definition of PCBU? You said as CEO.
The person in control of a business unit in terms of the health and safety requirements.
Okay, I just one of my other questions is do we insure our CEO against public liability or anything like that?
There are some things you can insure against and some you can't.
So as a bureaucrat, I guess I'm saying is that your concern as CEO is that if these water changes come in, that you would be left exposed. Is that correct?
Potentially, but that is in the context of not understanding everything yet. So as this report alludes to, well, we still don't know enough to consult with our community, and so as chief executives, we still don't know enough about where our liability may or may not lie, but it's just something that as a sector, chief executives are monitoring.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you. A question. When the Three Waters brings something that needs to be responded to by councillors, they are required to look at a number of options. Is that right? So they can present to council.
Councillor, are you referring to our obligations under the Local Government Act?
Yes.
As set out in the paper?
Yes.
Where it says that all practicable or viable alternatives need to be considered?
Yes, exactly. I know there's a reason I'm saying that. And that is, my next question is, do you believe central government has afforded local government the same amount of options and alternatives as we are required with our own communities?
Well, at this stage, central government aren't asking council to make a choice. So they're seeking feedback, and the current position of the government is that following that feedback, there'll be an opportunity for councils to consult with their communities and meet their obligations under the Act. So that is the current working supposition.
So my question is, why is not central government giving us a number of options to look at Because
Councillor,
in fact,
that's not a question. That's not a question that staff can answer.
but I think that's a question we can ask them is
Absolutely,
other
and you can do that, and you can do that when we get to debate.
yeah, because they're not affording us the same amount of consultation and engagement as they're expecting us to do at local level.
Councillor Raddick.
That I'm muting. Look, I'm in receipt of Mr. Dyer's revised civil defence clauses. I have a few questions for him, I guess, about that. I did flag that to him with an email straight after receiving his ones. I'm a bit concerned that, well, in the first instance, why are these clauses that you've written written in the sense that the legislation is a fait accompli?
Because that is.
So we've written it. So I've amended Mr. Dyer's. I don't know if you've seen the amended one to take into account the concern you had. We've written it in the style of the submission, and they are for council to then consider. So this is written so that it is internally consistent with the rest of the submission.
Right. Well, so as regards, I've only got one reply from Mr. Dyer, which is 12:37.
Councillor, if I might, I sent you something at 11:11. I mean 1:11.
No, I don't have that.
So maybe, and if I could, your worship, maybe councillor, if you were to look at that, it might address the concerns you have about a local flavour. I've tried to address that.
Yes.
We can give you a moment to find that, councillor, and come back to you if you'd like.
I've just refreshed my browser. There's nothing there. Anyway, I'll give it a few more minutes and come back. Yes. I'll leave my hand up and mute.
Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Worship. Several questions. At a number of points, Minister Mahuta has talked about or been asked the question, was she going to mandate this reform or not? And she was asked that question, I believe, at local government conference. But as recently as last Sunday on TV1's Q&A, she said, and I quote, "Reform proposals need everyone on board." She didn't answer directly the question, will you mandate? And then she went on to talk about various councils being in or out. Do you have a sense, and this question is for you, Mayor Hawkins, do you have a sense of some of the key councils in the Takiwā, and in fact we're one of those key councils, but Christchurch is the other? Do you have a sense of other councils and forming their positions at this time?
I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to where the politics of this might fall in other authorities, except to say that a large number of the concerns that have been voiced around our council table and are included in the draft submission are common across the rohi.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, just on that point of liability for the chief, that change in liability, Ms. Graham, do you have any sense at this time of when that point, the point at which that liability would shift?
It's not a change in liability, but it's a change in approach, and the regulator means the liability is likely to be more real.
Yeah, a bigger part, and that's in fact what I meant. Do you have a sense of when that would be? You may not. I don't know.
So it will be with the passing of the Water Services Entity Bill, is my understanding.
Excellent. Thank you. And I don't know who can answer this because we might not have an answer, but clearly we're not making a decision today. And I think there's a lot of people in our community who are really confused about that, given the feedback we've had. But we did have a decision-making date, but that seems to have not been mentioned recently by government. Do we have any sense of when the decision-making date will be? And do you get a sense that it will be before Christmas or in the new year? Or does anyone have any idea at this point?
The only date we know with any certainty at this point is the 1st of October for the feedback on this proposal.
For the feedback, sure. Okay. And Mayor Hawkins, did you have any comment on that?
Nothing different, just that the government, in response to the feedback that is provided through this process, will announce subsequent to the 1st of October what they intend on, what the timeline looking like.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Councillor Vandervis.
Is it true that the proposed three waters efficiencies that are claimed in the Morrison Lowe report and by government will only happen if most councils opt in?
That's one of the assumptions of the model.
So you would agree then that that we will only get benefit from the system if most councils opt in? That's really the question. Is that something that staff understand fully?
That's what the model is based on. So
yeah, I know that it's based on that, but do you agree that, as people that work in the industry, that we will only get these new efficiencies and better rates if by far the majority of councils opt in?
It's very difficult to say in a New Zealand context. It's based on experience overseas with aggregation of water services entities, like in Scotland, like in England, and like in Tasmania.
Okay. On page 99 of our report, this is the Morrison Lowe report that was done for us. On page 99, at the top of the page, it says that essentially that the DCC will see the smallest benefit of the new system, aggregating everything together of the Otago and Southland councils. Dunedin will see the smallest benefit due to its current size. Do you accept that all the other councils in Otago and Southland will see more benefit, if there is any, to this centralisation than Dunedin will?
That is consistent with both the WICS modelling and the Morrison Lowe assessment, and we broadly agree.
So our staff agree that Dunedin will see the smallest benefit of all the Otago and Southland councils.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all for now.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a question following on from Councillor Vandervis' question about efficiencies. I'm just concerned that those efficiencies, even in the best case scenario, may well be illusory. And I want to ask staff if they've seen, for example, the BBC News item about the failings of Scottish Water that Councillor O'Malley circulated to all of us, which would appear to demonstrate that all is not as people would have us believe in Scotland.
Yes, we've seen and read that article and aware of some of the challenges with Scottish Water.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. I think there's been enough questions to make around the role of iwi in this that I want to come to this question, and is, do we have clarity as to what the proposed role of iwi will be, given that obviously whatever that role is, it will have some impact on what we do with delivery. Do we have clarity on what that role will be? Large, small, tiny, massive? We don't. Do we have any clarity on it?
Only at a broad level.
So it gets to one of my amendments then, that would it not be a good idea to seek clarity of that so that we know exactly what this relationship will be? Because I'm positive for it, but I don't know what it is.
Can I ask specifically which part of this proposed structure do you mean?
Well, at the moment, we've just got a generic commentary around about 50% membership on the regional governance group. And then there is a potential for writing things like Te Mana o Te Wai statements and other such things. Is that it? Or is there intended to be more? I mean, I just quite literally don't know. And I'm wondering why DIA is talking to iwi in one room one day and then talking to councils in another room the other day, because we're then going to be joined together at the end. So I'm wondering why we're not as a group, at least, in the same room talking about this as we go forward, so that we can come out with a good outcome at the end, because I'm worried that the lack of information flow is creating rumor. And that's not good. So that's why I'm like, is it not a good thing to put in the letter that we would like a little bit more clarity of the role of iwi in the proposed activities going forward? It's not a statement of whether you do or do not want iwi. It's a clarity of what will the proposed role be.
Okay, Councillor Barker.
Well, I wouldn't mind an answer though. Isn't that actually do we not think that, would it not be something that will help us with our planning to have a clear understanding of what that will be?
I just don't know if that's a question of staff, but
well, I'll throw it open to the floor.
Well, no, that's not how this meeting works, Councillor.
Well then, okay then, Mr. Drew and Mr. Dyer, in the absence of knowing anything, presumably we don't, can you design any implication of the role of iwi?
What?
Well, I'm saying we've got an absence of knowledge. How can we go forward?
I just don't know what the phrase "design any implication" means. That's all.
I don't believe this is going to happen, but let's just say one of the ideas was that iwi would get all the assets, and then there would be quite a big implication. Would there not be? But I don't believe that's happening, by the way. I'm saying we don't know what will happen, so therefore we are trying to work out implications of a relationship that we don't know what the relationship is. Would that not be a problem for planning? I'll just leave it in the air, then we'll move on, because we'll be here all day waiting for the answer.
Councillor, at this stage, the proposal is for the proposal that we have in terms of detail and in terms of iwi involvement is for a 50% co-governance role with a selection of council representatives. That is all we have and all we understand. So we take that at face value, and that as described in the proposals, that iwi would contribute to governance at that level at a 50% with a 50% contribution. But further to that, we don't know anymore.
And the entity, whether it is a council alone or a group of councils or the entity D model, will have obligations to respond to Te Mana o Te Wai statements that are drafted for them.
Are we aware that at the Gore meeting, the DIA representative said that while they would listen to the Te Mana o Te Wai statement, they were not obliged to give effect to it? And then when I clarified that, the new director of Te Mata Arawai said, in fact, yes, that is the case. They will not be obliged to give effect to it. And I know I see Councillor Lafisa nodding because she was sitting next to me when I asked the question. Are we aware of that?
We are now.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker. Councillor Benson-Pope. Okay, it's 20 to 2. I'm going to move that we adjourn the meeting until 2 o'clock. Seconded by Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Thank you. Kia ora koutou, and apologies for the delay. In the adjournment, I spent some time taking advice from staff as to how we might find a constructive way forward through the rest of this agenda item. And in a high-level discussion of all of the proposed amendments that have been received up until this point, it became increasingly clear that there are challenges in terms of the internal consistency of the letter that need to be resolved. And given the volume of amendments that have been provided and the time that staff have had to reflect on those up until this point, we're not going to get the best advice around that at this meeting. So my proposal here is to end the meeting now. People can have through until midday tomorrow to provide feedback to staff on the draft submission. That will be collated and views, they'll be collated in the form of a report that will come to our council meeting next Tuesday on the 28th, acknowledging then though that there will be no capacity beyond that meeting for us to sign off on a submission offering feedback on what is a reasonably significant proposal. But I think the risk of continuing down the path that we are going on is that you end up with something that is, as I say, at very least internally inconsistent, which isn't necessarily the kind of work that we want to offer on behalf of our communities. So if people have anything that they wish to have considered, that would be, if that could be sent through by midday tomorrow, that should allow staff adequate time to have a report back on the public agenda per the notification requirements for our meeting next Tuesday. Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you. That seems eminently sensible, given the issues around, who got it early, who didn't, and things that people have thought of they want added, such as the CDM stuff, which looks sensible. Can you just be more specific, please, about who the staff member is or where the contact should be, so that things don't get lost because someone sent it to someone else?
Good point. And I think Councillor Raddick's suggestion around civil defence issues is an instructive one. It's an issue that has been flagged and has been worked through with staff in a way that is consistent with the other work that they have done. And so people don't necessarily need to draft the paragraphs themselves. Just the high level input is probably fine, and I would send them to Ms. Sullivan in the first instance.
Okay.
Could I suggest that it might be better to send it to Simon, me and Tom, and copy Claren, because that would be more efficient. It would mean we would have them immediately, because we will be the ones working on the draft report.
Perfect.
And if I may, one subsequent to that, it seems to me that a lot of the suggestions that I've seen from Councillor O'Malley are perfectly acceptable and sensible, where in particular where they relate to items that have been missed. And I would hope that we'd focus on that sort of thing that would be, I expect, more generally easier for people to accept quickly than matters around the tone or how grumpy are we going to be or whatever else. Or just putting that out there for consideration.
Thank you. Okay, well, it was slightly earlier than anyone anticipated, but thank you for your engagement and for your discussion. And we'll see. We'll pick this up again at our meeting next Tuesday. And this meeting has finished.
Excuse me, are you going to adjourn?
No, we're not adjourn. It'll be a new report coming to a new meeting.
Right, but you need to close this meeting then. Have you moved a motion or something to do that?
No, it doesn't. I have checked. It doesn't require. It doesn't require a procedural motion to close a meeting. But I am saying it out loud so that it can be recorded as such. At 22 minutes after the hour of 2, with apologies to Richie Beno, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you.